When you look at the psychology of an avoidant, the first thing you notice is the way they treat closeness as a threat. To them, intimacy feels dangerous, almost like stepping into enemy territory where they could be ambushed at any moment. So what do? They build walls, they withdraw, they protect, they hide. On the surface, it looks like strength, it looks like independence. But here's the truth that nobody talks about. Those walls don't just keep other people out, they also keep them locked in. And when you're locked in your own fortress, what starts out as safety eventually becomes suffocation. It's a paradox. They believe they're avoiding pain, but in reality, they're creating a different kind of suffering, one that is quieter, slower, and far more corrosive. Because human beings are wired for connection. You can go back to the most fundamental levels of neuroscience and biology. Our brains release oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin when we bond, when we feel seen, when we feel held. To cut yourself off from that is to deprive yourself of the very chemicals that give life meaning. So while an avoidant thinks they're escaping heartbreak, what they're really inviting is emptiness. They trade the temporary discomfort of vulnerability for the long-term ache of isolation. And here's the piece that really stings: avoidants don't usually recognize the cost until it's too late. In the moment, pulling back feels smart. It feels protective. It feels like I'm safe, I'm in control. But over time, days turn into years, and that safe little bubble becomes unbearably small. The world narrows. Opportunities for intimacy, for laughter, for growth, they pass by. And when those moments are gone, you can't get them back. That's the cruel irony. The fear of loss creates a pattern that guarantees even greater loss. Psychologists often call this emotional isolation a defensive strategy. But let's go deeper. It's not just a strategy, it's a prison sentence. Because without vulnerability, there is no true intimacy. Without intimacy, there is no real trust. And without trust, relationships collapse under the weight of pretense. You can have companionship without closeness. You can have conversations without connection. But you will always feel the hollow space between you and the other person. That hollow space eventually becomes unbearable. And when it does, the avoidant finds themselves alone, even in a room full of people who once cared for them. Think about it like this: every time they run from closeness, they're not just running from the other person. They're running from their own potential to love and be loved. They're running from the part of themselves that longs for belonging, the part that was born to connect. And the more they run, the more fragmented they become inside. That fragmentation turns into anxiety, into depression, into a sense of being disconnected not just from others, but from life itself. So the hidden cost of emotional isolation isn't just loneliness, it's the slow erosion of the self. It's the shrinking of the soul. And if you've ever seen someone who has built their whole life around avoidance, you know the look. On the outside, they appear calm, strong, untouchable. But in their eyes, there's a quiet exhaustion, a weight that comes from holding everything in, from carrying the burden of never letting anyone close enough to ease the load. And here's the ultimate truth. No matter how high the walls, no matter how thick the fortress, the human heart was not built to live in exile. Connection is not optional, it's oxygen. You can survive without it, but you cannot thrive. And sooner or later, the avoidant has to face that reality. The choices between the discomfort of vulnerability or the devastation of a life half-lived. If you study the patterns of avoidance, you'll notice something fascinating. Everything they do is about control. They want to control the pace of closeness, control the flow of intimacy, control the way emotions surface in a relationship. It's not random. It's an entire strategy to manage fear. Because for an avoidant, losing control feels like drowning. It feels like they're at the mercy of someone else's needs, and that terrifies them. So they retreat, they set boundaries that are more like barricades. They ration out affection like it's a scarce resource. They believe that by doing this, they're maintaining power. But here's the irony: they're not gaining power, they're surrendering it. Think about the paradox. The more they try to control love, the more powerless they become within it. Love, by its very nature, resists control. You can't micromanage intimacy. You can't predict every emotional response or regulate every vulnerable moment. When you try to do that, love withers. It doesn't die in a dramatic explosion. It dies quietly through distance, mistrust, and disconnection. So while the avoidant feels like they're steering the ship, what's really happening is the current is carrying them away from the very destination they desire: genuine connection. And this is where the trap deepens. Because once they sense that intimacy is slipping away, they double down on their strategies. They cling tighter to control, they restrict more, they distance further. But the more they grip, the less they actually hold. It's like trying to grasp water with a clenched fist. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips away. The very thing they fear, losing closeness, becomes the inevitable outcome of their need to dominate it. What's so striking about this is that on the outside, it looks like strength. People may see the avoidant as calm, unbothered, even self-sufficient. But beneath the surface is a constant tension, a quiet panic. Because when your entire sense of security depends on managing every variable in a relationship, you're never really free. You're enslaved by your own fear of losing control. And in that state, what you call power is actually the deepest form of powerlessness. Now let's go deeper. Why does this happen? Because control is an illusion. Life itself cannot be controlled, and love especially cannot be controlled. Love is dynamic, unpredictable, alive. It requires surrender, openness, the willingness to step into the unknown. That's where the magic is. But for the avoidant, the unknown feels unbearable, so they choose predictability instead. And predictability, while safe, is sterile. It lacks the wild, vibrant energy that makes love transformative. In trying to hold on to their version of safety, they sacrifice the very essence of what they secretly crave. And here's the heartbreak. They don't just lose the relationship, they lose themselves. When you shut down vulnerability, when you control instead of connect, you cut off access to your own depth. You might feel secure in the short term, but long term, you're hollow. You've reduced the infinite complexity of love to a checklist of rules and boundaries, and in that process, you've stripped it of its power to change you. Because love is meant to shape us, to challenge us, to break us open and make us more whole. Without that surrender, without that willingness to let go of control, the avoidant misses the very point of love itself. So the paradox stands: the harder they try to hold power, the more powerless they become. And at some point, every avoidant has to face this truth. Real strength isn't in control, it's in trust. Real security doesn't come from walls, it comes from the courage to let those walls fall. Because in love, the greatest power you will ever hold is the power to let go. One of the most devastating consequences avoidants face is self-sabotage. They don't always see it in the moment because their strategies feel protective, even rational. But if you look closer, you'll notice that the very habits they use to keep themselves safe are the ones that undermine their deepest desires. They want love, but they run from it. They want connection, but they pull away when it gets close. They want growth, but they shut down the opportunities that would force them to evolve. It's not rejection from the outside world that ruins them. It's the rejection they deliver to themselves over and over again. Picture this: someone enters their life who's genuine, who's ready to love, who offers safety and presence. Instead of leaning in, the avoidant questions it, distances from it, or even finds fault in it. They tell themselves, it's too much, it won't last, I'll get hurt. They push away the very thing they long for, and in that moment, they confuse self-protection with self-destruction. They think they're sparing themselves pain, but what they're actually doing is guaranteeing emptiness. And here's the bitter truth: love doesn't wait forever. Opportunities don't circle back endlessly. Every time the avoidant sabotages intimacy, they close a door, and with every closed door, a piece of their potential life disappears. Maybe it's the partner who would have stood by them through storms. Maybe it's the family they could have built. Maybe it's even the version of themselves they could have become if they had allowed another person to truly see them. The tragedy isn't only the people they lose, it's the unrealized version of life they never get to live. Now, you and I both know that growth requires risk. Anything worth having in life, success, fulfillment, love, demands stepping into uncertainty. You cannot grow without risking failure. You cannot love without risking pain. But avoidants try to rewrite that law of existence. They want the reward without the risk, the connection without the vulnerability, the intimacy without the surrender. And that's where self-sabotage takes root. Because the attempt to bypass risk is actually the fastest route to loss. By refusing to risk pain, they guarantee it in another form: regret. And regret is heavier than heartbreak. Because heartbreak eventually heals, you process it, you learn from it, you move forward. But regret is a haunting. It whispers, what if? What could have been? It follows you into the quiet moments of your life, reminding you that you turned away from something you actually wanted. For the avoidant, that haunting becomes louder with time. And by the time they realize it, years may have passed, opportunities may be gone, and the damage may already be irreversible. This isn't just about romantic love either. It's friendships, it's family, it's career opportunities, it's personal growth. Self-sabotage is a pattern, and once it's activated in one area, it leaks into others. The avoidant doesn't just avoid closeness with people. They avoid challenges, risks, and breakthroughs. They build a smaller life and they're capable of living, all in the name of safety. And one day, they look around and wonder why they feel unfulfilled, why nothing feels alive, why everything seems muted. The answer isn't outside of them. It's in the silent choices they made to sabotage their own potential. So the third consequence is this: the avoidant doesn't just lose others, they lose themselves. And that's the harshest loss of all. Because at the end of the day, the question isn't whether life will bring pain. It will. The real question is whether we're willing to embrace that pain in service of love, growth, and meaning, or whether we'll sabotage ourselves into a life of emptiness. There's a consequence that doesn't show up immediately, but it's the one that carries the heaviest weight over time. It's not just loneliness, not just missed opportunities, not even the loss of connection in the present moment. It's regret. Regret is the shadow that follows avoidance long after the choices are made, long after the people they've pushed away have moved on. It's the voice that whispers late at night. What if I had let them in? What if I had chosen differently? What if I hadn't been so afraid? The human mind can justify almost anything in the moment. Avoidants convince themselves they're doing the smart thing, the safe thing. They'll say, I'm not ready. I just need space. This isn't the right person. And maybe in the moment, that narrative works. But fast forward 10 years, 20 years, and those justifications don't hold the same power. Because what was once a decision to protect themselves becomes a pattern of loss. And when they look back, they start to see the trail of relationships, of experiences, of love that could have been theirs but never was. That's when regret settles in. And regret has a way of cutting deeper than almost any pain. Why is regret so devastating? Because unlike heartbreak, it doesn't heal on its own. Heartbreak is a wound that time and growth can close. Regret, though, is different. It's a mirror. It reflects back the choices you made and the opportunities you refused. And the more you stare into that mirror, the harder it is to look away. You can't change the past. You can't rewind and say yes where you once said no. That's why regret weighs so heavily on avoidants. They spend years running from vulnerability, only to arrive at a point where they can no longer run from themselves. And here's the deeper truth: regret is not just about losing other people. It's about betraying yourself. When you deny connection, you deny the deepest part of your own humanity, the part that craves belonging, intimacy, love. Every time an avoidant turns away from closeness, they're not just saying no to someone else, they're saying no to their own heart. And years later, they feel the hollowness of that decision. The life they built might look successful on the outside, but inside, there's a gnawing sense that something essential was missed. Something that no achievement, no distraction, no material success can replace. I've spoken to people at the end of their lives, and you know what stands out? They don't regret the money they didn't make or the jobs they didn't take. They regret the love they didn't give, the relationships they didn't nurture, the people they didn't allow themselves to cherish. Avoidants are especially vulnerable to this because they spend so much of their lives defending themselves against the very experiences that would have given their life meaning. And when the defense finally crumbles, when time strips away the illusion of control, they're left face to face with the simple reality: they ran from love, and in doing so, they ran from themselves. This is the final secret consequence: living with the echo of what could have been. And that echo doesn't fade, it grows louder with time. Until one day they realize the walls they built didn't just block out others. They blocked out their own future. And that's why I say this with absolute certainty: the greatest pain is not the pain of vulnerability, it's the pain of regret. Because at least with vulnerability, you gain the chance at love, the chance at meaning, the chance at a life fully lived. But regret leaves you with nothing but shadows.